And Josiah Milinich joins us. You are Communications Director at Lifeway Church in Lebanon. You are involved with social media. You are involved with cell phones. It really seems like we are addicted to cell phones. Why?
Well, I mean, it's scientifically proven. There's been research done that shows, hey, there's a release of dopamine that goes into your brain via the likes, the shares, the subscribes, whatever the notification may be. But just like every other addictive nature, every other substance abuse, whatever it could be, it's never a physical or medical issue, but it's actually that root issue of how much we like to be liked. And so because of that, there becomes a desire for this release in your brain. And I think that's the actual addictive nature of it.
So how do you guard yourself? How do you guard your heart, which is, obviously what Proverbs always warns us about?
Right. Well, I think anything that God can actually use as a tool in our lives, the enemy designs it to be a trap. And I think with anything that we see, especially social media, we live in a digital age. You can't deny that. I think it's turning into a trap. It's turning into something to trap the believer in a different mindset with comparison or whatever it may be. And a scary statistic is an average cell phone user picks up their phone more than 1,500 times in a week. And I think when you see that happening, I think most people would say, absolutely not me, I wouldn't do that. But what I've noticed is that self-awareness is key. I believe Jesus teaches us on fasting and as a primary topic because it is the fastest way to realize things that are out of alignment in your life, that are not being used in moderation, that are being abused. And I think if you're going to be better with this issue, you need to acknowledge the fact. And I think the enemy can only keep you in bondage as long as you don't acknowledge something. And so you think to guard your heart, you have to be aware, number one, and acknowledge like, hey, am I doing this right? And then allowing restraint into your life, which I think is one of the most effective principles to lead to a holy life.
And you can really see how much time you're actually spending on your phone. I get an update every week, and actually since I've been working here, mine's down to like 21 minutes a day. So I'm like, hey.
I don't have that record. I think the record's a little bit. Rewind. Go ahead, Deborah.
I was going to say, so what's your advice? I mean, what do you do? I mean, you can be self-aware, and that's great advice, but what's a deeper meaning?
Yeah, well, I think there's a both and, because I think the counter of this would be to argue that, Christians should remove themselves from social media. I've heard this debate, I've heard this whole idea, and I think that's also a temptation of the enemy, because if the enemy can't trap you, his goal is to actually get you to flee from the world. And the Bible's Jesus' words, not mine, says go into the world and make impact in all spheres. And so I think, like I said before, anything that can be used as a tool, right? This is a thing in our pocket if we use it as a resource. The problem is we've made it our God, and we look for that comparison, that like, that desire. And so I would say this, if you feel like you want to be affirmed, if you feel like you want those likes, the same call as always that Jesus says, deny yourself, pick up your cross. So in this sense, deny yourself, pick up your desire to be affirmed, your desire to be liked by other people, and actually use that to reflect God's glory. What type of content are you posting? What type of content are you looking at? Check those, parameters, those notifications. I have those as well put in place, and actually creating that. The actual practical advice, Jesus says, if your eye's going to cause you to sin, cut it out. Radical or reasonable? I don't know.
Just go rewind just for a second. This notion of fasting, about setting your phone aside as your life is going faster, fasting.
Well, fasting is just denying yourself in the natural, right? I think that's when you hear Jesus saying, deny yourself, right? If we're looking at a resurrection, we're looking at Jesus coming back to life. There's no resurrection without a death. And so I think if we're going to be ourselves, if we're going to look at it and be like, man, is this actually adding, fuel to my soul? Is it taking away? What's the first thing 90% of people, I'm making this statistic up, but most people in the morning, what do you pick up? Your phone. It's the first thing. You haven't even acknowledged that there's breath in your lungs. You haven't even acknowledged that there's a purpose that you're here for, and you're already scrolling on something. And so I think denying yourself is actually, again, not being legalistic, but being aware to say, hey, I need to actually set parameters. Like my phone needs to be turned off until a certain time on both sides, before I go to bed and when I get up.
I'm going to put it in the box.
Yeah, great advice.
Josiah, thanks for joining us. I think this was pretty helpful.
It certainly was.